she squeezed my hand at the cemetery, and I thought that was love. My daughter-in-law standing beside me in the November cold, tears on her cheeks, one arm around my son's waist and her other hand wrapped around mine. My wife of 34 years had just been lowered into the ground, and the woman my son married was holding my hand like I was her own father. I remember thinking, at least I still have them. I was 67 years old, freshly widowed, and that thought, that small, desperate thought, would cost me almost everything. My name is Gerald. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer, designed bridges across 3 states, retired with a clean pension and a house I'd paid off in full. The house my wife and I built our life in. 4 bedrooms, a workshop in the back where I built furniture on weekends, a garden my wife tended every spring until the spring she couldn't anymore, 2 acres outside of Columbus, Ohio, nothing fancy. But it was ours. My son, my only child, is named Derek. He's 41 now. Smart kid, always was. Got his mother's eyes and, I used to joke, her stubbornness too. He married a woman named Renee about 8 years ago. I liked Renee at first. She was sharp, well-dressed, always knew the right thing to say at the right moment. Looking back, I understand now that knowing the right thing to say and meaning it are 2 very different skills. Renee had mastered the first one completely. After the funeral, Derek called every few days, asked how I was sleeping, whether I was eating. He drove down from their place in Dublin on weekends sometimes, and the 3 of us would sit on the back porch, and I would try not to look at the garden my wife used to keep. About 2 months after she passed, Derek brought it up for the first time. "Dad, you don't have to be out here alone, you know." I told him I wasn't alone. I had the neighbors. I had my buddy Raymond from the engineering firm. We played cards on Thursdays. I was fine. "Raymond's 72, Derek said. "I'm just saying. What if something happened? What if you fell in the workshop and nobody knew for 2 days? I told him I'd get one of those medical alert buttons if it made him feel better. He laughed. Then he got quiet. Then he said, "Renee and I have been talking. We've got the space. You could sell this place, move in with us. The housing market's strong right now. You could get good money." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked out at the backyard. The garden was already going ragged without my wife's hands in it. "I'm not selling your mother's house," I said. Derek nodded. He didn't push it that day, but Renee did. Not that same visit. She was smarter than that. She waited about 3 weeks, came down on a Saturday when Derek was stuck at work, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and that careful, warm expression she wore like a coat. "Gerald, I just want you to know that our offer is real," she said. "We're not trying to pressure you." "But Derek worries. I worry." "This is a lot of house for one person." "I know," I said. "Have you thought about your estate planning at all? Since—" She paused, tilted her head. "Since everything?" I told her my wife and I had simple wills. Everything to Derek. She nodded slowly like a doctor receiving test results. "What about a living trust? Have you looked into that?" I hadn't. I didn't really know the difference. My wife had handled most of the paperwork in our marriage. Not because I wasn't capable, but because she was better at it, and we both knew it. Without her, I was realizing how many things she had quietly managed that I'd never had to think about. "A living trust would protect you," Renee said. "Keep everything out of probate. It's very simple to set up." She slid a brochure across the table. From a law firm in Dublin. "I already asked around," she said. "These folks are great. Very straightforward. Derek and I use them for our own planning. If you want, we could all go together, make it a family thing." I thought she was being thoughtful. I thanked her for the brochure and said I'd think about it. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was that Renee already knew everything about my finances. Not because I'd told her, but because about 6 weeks after the funeral, when I was barely sleeping and running on casseroles, the neighbors kept leaving on my porch, I had added Derek to my primary checking account. It seemed like the practical thing to do at the time. Derek had suggested it. He said it was just in case something happened to me. He'd be able to pay my bills, handle emergencies. He brought the paperwork to my kitchen table, and I signed it without really reading it. My wife had just died. My son was sitting across from me looking worried, and I thought, this is what family does. What I signed, as I'd eventually discover, gave Derek full joint ownership of the account. Not just access for emergencies. Ownership. He could withdraw everything, transfer everything, and because the account was linked to the automatic payments for my property taxes, my utilities, my homeowner's insurance, it was, without my realizing it, the thread that held everything else together. The months went by. Derek and Renee came down less often. The phone calls stretched from every few days to once a week to a quick text here and there. I told myself they were busy. They had their own lives. That was natural. What kept me occupied was the house. I'd started working in the workshop again, building a bookshelf I didn't need just to have something to do with my hands. Raymond and I still played cards. I joined a grief support group at the church 2 towns over, which I'd told no one about because it felt like admitting something. The people there were good. One woman, Helen, had lost her husband the same month I'd lost my wife. We'd get coffee sometimes after the sessions. Nothing romantic. Just 2 people who understood the particular weight of a house that's too quiet. It was Helen, actually, who first said something that lodged itself in my mind and wouldn't let go. We were sitting in a diner in late March, about 5 months after my wife passed. Helen mentioned that her son-in-law had been asking a lot of questions about her condo. Who held the title, whether she'd updated her will. She said it with a small, tight smile, like she was embarrassed to admit she'd noticed. Probably nothing, she said. But I called my attorney anyway, just to check. I drove home thinking about that. About Renee and the brochure, about how many times in those early months the conversation had circled back to the house, the estate planning, the property taxes. Whether I considered downsizing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was a grieving old man reading into things because I needed somewhere to put my fear, but I called my own attorney the next morning, a woman named Patricia Cole who I'd used twice before for routine things. I told her I just wanted to review where things stood. She said, "Come on in." I sat in her office on a Thursday afternoon in April, and she pulled up my records and went quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "Gerald," she said carefully, "did you know that your son is listed as a joint account holder on your primary checking account?" I said yes. I'd added him for emergencies. She nodded. "And are you aware that 2 weeks ago, a request was submitted to your county recorder's office, an inquiry about the deed transfer process for your property?" I heard the words. I understood each one individually. It took a moment for them to form a sentence in my mind that made sense. "What kind of inquiry?" I said. "The kind someone makes when they're preparing to transfer a title," Patricia said. "I have a contact at the recorder's office. She flagged it because your property was already in the system from your wife's estate process last fall." I sat there in that chair and felt something I can only describe as the floor tilting. Not anger, not yet. First, there was just this cold dropping sensation, like the moment before you understand something you can't undo. "Is my name still on the deed?" I asked. "Yes," Patricia said. "The inquiry was just that, an inquiry. No transfer has been filed. Yet." That word sat between us on her desk. I asked her what I should do. She leaned forward. "First, tell me everything. When did Derek get added to your account? Has anyone spoken to you about a living trust? Has Renee or Derek asked you to sign anything recently?" I told her everything. The account, the brochure, the conversations about selling the house. The way the topic came up again and again and again, and each time I'd push back and each time it seemed to fade, only to reappear a few weeks later from a slightly different angle. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Gerald, I want you to listen to me carefully," she said. "I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but what you're describing is a pattern. It may be innocent. It may not be. Either way, you need to protect yourself now, before anything is filed." She told me what we were going to do. First, Remove Derek from the checking account. Not angrily, not confrontationally. Just quietly get it done. She said I should go to the bank alone, without telling anyone first. Second, establish a revocable living trust. A real one, drawn up by her, naming me as the sole trustee with a successor trustee of my choosing, who was not Derek or Renee. The house, the account, everything would transfer into the trust. Third, if Derek or Renee asked to come to any appointments, any signings, I was to say it had already been handled. I asked her how long it would take. She said if I was serious, she could have the documents ready within a week. I told her I was serious. I left her office and sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 15 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was past the age where shock makes you cry. I was just very still, the way the air gets still before a storm, and I was thinking about my son at 7 years old, falling off his bike in the driveway, running to me with blood on his knee and absolute certainty that I could fix it. I thought about the hand at the cemetery. Then I put the truck in gear and drove to my bank. The woman at the bank, her name tag said Carol, walked me through the process without any fuss. Removing a joint account holder requires only the original account holder's signature if the account was set up in my name first. Derek's addition had been an amendment. It could be undone. I signed the form. Carol said the change would process within 1 business day. I thanked her and walked out into the April afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, blinking in the light. I did not call Derek that night. I did not call anyone. I went home, made a sandwich I barely tasted, and went out to the workshop and stood among the half-finished bookshelf and the sawdust and the smell of cedar, and I thought about what I was going to do next. The following week, I went back to Patricia's office 3 times. We drew up the trust documents. She recommended a woman from her church, a retired schoolteacher named Dolores, as my successor trustee. I didn't need to know Dolores well. I just needed someone who was not connected to Derek and Renee, someone who had no financial interest in my estate, someone who would simply carry out the instructions I put in place. I met Dolores for coffee. She was 70, sharp as a tack, and had apparently done this for 2 other people Patricia had referred. She said, "I won't pretend I don't know why people need this. It's more common than it should be." She shook my hand and said she was honored to help. The trust documents were signed on a Wednesday afternoon. The deed transfer into the trust was filed with the county recorder's office on that same day. Patricia handled it. She called me that evening and said, "It's done. Your property is now held in the Gerald R. Whitmore Revocable Living Trust. Your son cannot touch it without your signature." I thanked her. She said, "Don't thank me. Just don't sign anything anyone puts in front of you without calling me first." I said I understood. 3 days later, Derek called. He was cheerful, relaxed, the way people are when they think everything is proceeding according to plan. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He asked about the workshop, about Raymond, about whether I'd gotten the gutters cleaned like I'd been putting off. Normal conversation, the kind we used to have before I understood what was underneath it. Then, toward the end of the call, casual as mentioning the weather, "Hey, Dad, Renee found a really good estate attorney up here, the living trust thing we talked about. They said it's really simple. We could probably knock it out in 1 appointment. We were thinking we'd drive down Saturday, take you to lunch, and then swing by their office if you're up for it." I was quiet for just a second. "That's kind of you both," I said. "But actually, I already took care of it." A pause. "You did?" "Yeah. My attorney drew everything up last week. It's all filed." Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh." His voice had shifted. Something underneath it had changed. The relaxed quality was gone, replaced by something more careful. That's great, Dad. I didn't know you were working with an attorney." "Patricia Cole." "I've used her before." "Right. A beat. Did she, what kind of trust did you set up?" "Revocable living trust. Everything in it. House, accounts, everything." "Who did you name as trustee?" I almost smiled, because that question, the speed of it, the specificity of it, told me everything I needed to know about what the past few months had been. "Myself," I said, "and a successor trustee Patricia recommended." "Not, you didn't name me?" "No." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in a long time. Derek said, "Dad, we were trying to help. We were worried about you." "I know you were worried," I said. "I appreciate that. The successor trustee should probably be family. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? To have someone who knows you, who, Derek." I kept my voice level. "The way you keep your voice when you're choosing your words with care. I know about the inquiry at the recorder's office." "Nothing." "I know about the inquiry," I said again. "Someone asked about the deed transfer process for my property. About 6 weeks ago." The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, very quietly, "Dad, that's not what it looks like." "What does it look like?" "We were just looking into options. We thought if you decided to sell, it would be easier to have things set up already." "You were looking into transferring the deed on my house," I said, without telling me, "while you had access to my bank account. I wasn't going to do anything without your permission. And yet you didn't mention to me that you'd made that inquiry. Not once." He didn't say anything. I heard Renee's voice in the background, faint, asking something. Derek must have moved away from her because his voice dropped lower. "Dad, we're not bad people. We made some plans we shouldn't have. I know how it looks. I'm sorry." I sat with that for a moment. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I'm going to need some time. Dad, I'll call you in a few weeks. I need some time." I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen in the quiet house, and for a while I didn't move. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The garden, through the window, was starting to come back on its own. Stubborn green things pushing up through ground my wife had enriched over 30 years. I cried then. Not from anger. Not from grief exactly, or not only from grief. I cried because I had spent 40 years building things, bridges, furniture, a marriage, a family. And I understood in that moment that some things cannot be built back once you see what's underneath them. But here's the other thing I understood. The house was mine. The account was mine. The deed was filed. The trust was in place. Whatever had been planned. And I have thought about it a great deal in the months since, turning it over like a stone to look at what lives underneath. It had not succeeded. I had moved first. Patricia called me the next morning to check in. I told her about the conversation with Derek. She listened and said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Older." She said, "You did everything right." I told Helen about it over coffee the following week. Not all of it, over coffee the following week. Not all of it, just enough. She nodded slowly and said, "The sad thing is, they probably told themselves they were doing you a favor, that you were old and alone and couldn't manage." "Maybe," I said. "Doesn't make it right." "No," I said, "it doesn't. Here's what I want you to know. If you're watching this and you're somewhere in your 60s or 70s and you think it can't happen to you, it can. It doesn't require a bad person. It requires a person who has started to see you as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. That shift can happen in someone you love. It can happen slowly, without them fully understanding what they're doing. Or it can happen deliberately. Either way, the result is the same, if you're not paying attention. Add someone to your bank account only if you have reviewed every implication of that decision with an attorney you trust. Not a family attorney. Not someone your child recommends. Your attorney. Someone who works for you alone. Do not let anyone rush you into estate planning decisions. The urgency is almost never real. What is real is that people who want access to your assets benefit from you making fast decisions you don't fully understand. Get a living trust, drawn up by your own attorney, and name a successor trustee who has no financial stake in your estate. It does not have to be a stranger. It can be a trusted friend, a pastor, a longtime neighbor. It just cannot be someone who stands to gain. And if you feel that pull of guilt, the voice that says you're being suspicious, you're being ungrateful, this is your family, and family doesn't do that. I want you to hear this from a 67-year-old man who almost learned too late. Love and protection are not opposites. Protecting yourself is not an act of distrust. It is an act of survival. My son called again in June. We talked for a long time. It was not easy, and it was not resolved in a single call. Some things take longer. I don't know yet what our relationship will look like on the other side of this. I hope it can be repaired. I genuinely do. But the house is still mine. The deed is still in the trust. And for the first time since November, when I walk out to the workshop in the morning and smell the cedar and hear the birds starting up in the old oak at the back of the yard, I feel something I'd almost forgotten. I feel like I'm still standing on ground that belongs to me, and nobody is going to take that from me while I'm still breathing.